Captain Zarth clicked her mandibles nervously as she stared at the communication console aboard the Kethmoran research vessel Silent Observer. The gentle blue glow of the ship's bioluminescent panels cast eerie shadows across her six-armed form as she contemplated the message she was about to send. Her species, the Veltar, had been monitoring the galaxy's younger civilizations for over 3,000 cycles, carefully documenting their progress while maintaining strict non-interference protocols. Today, those protocols were about to be broken. Commander, her communications officer, Jex Nil, turned from his station with concern evident in his large, multifaceted eyes. The quantum cascade failure in the Nexus Prime system is accelerating faster than our models predicted. The colonial stations there have maybe 6 standard days before complete gravitational collapse. Zarth felt her stomach cavities churn. Nexus Prime wasn't just any system. It housed over 40 million Kethmoran civilians across 12 different worlds and orbital habitats. When their star had begun its unexpected death spiral 3 weeks ago, triggering a cascade effect that would eventually tear apart the entire system's gravitational structure, the Galactic Council had mobilized every available rescue fleet. It wasn't enough. "What's the current evacuation status?" she asked, though she already knew the answer would be devastating. 18 million have been relocated to temporary refugee stations in neighboring systems, Jex Nil reported, his voice barely above a whisper. "But our transport capacity is completely overwhelmed. Even with the Zephyrian cargo fleets and the Altarian emergency vessels, we can only evacuate another 8 million before the cascade reaches critical mass." The mathematics were simple and horrible. 14 million people would die because they didn't have enough ships. Zarth moved to the tactical display, her multiple arms dancing across the holographic controls with practiced precision. The three-dimensional map of local space showed the pathetic collection of rescue vessels scattered across the Nexus Prime system like tiny sparks against an ocean of darkness. Beyond the system's edge, marked in the neutral zones that separated civilized space from the unknown regions, lay territories that galactic law forbade them from entering. "Commander," Science Officer Nethera spoke up from her station. "I've been running probability matrices on potential solutions. There is one possibility we haven't considered." "What kind of possibility?" Zarth asked, though something in Nethera's tone made her nervous. "The human territories lie only 12 light-years from Nexus Prime. According to our surveillance data, they possess a significantly larger fleet than our current intelligence estimates suggested. Their industrial capacity appears to have grown exponentially in the past 50 cycles. Zarth's mandibles clacked in disbelief.
"Humans.
"You're suggesting we contact a species that hasn't even achieved proper interstellar travel? Their fastest vessels barely exceed light speed by marginal factors. That's where our intelligence may be outdated, Commander," Nethera continued, pulling up a series of sensor readings that made the entire bridge crew fall silent. "These readings are from our long-range monitoring stations at the edge of human space. They show shipyard activity on a scale that rivals major galactic powers." The holographic display shifted to show grainy images of massive industrial complexes orbiting a yellow star. Even at this resolution, the sheer size of the construction projects was staggering. Kilometer-long vessel frames stretched across the void, surrounded by clouds of smaller construction ships that moved with the coordinated precision of an advanced civilization. "How many ships do you estimate they have?" Zarth asked quietly. "Conservative estimates put their total fleet at over 50,000 vessels of various classes," Nethera replied. "If even half of those could be configured for emergency transport." The bridge fell silent except for the gentle humming of the ship's bioneural systems. 50,000 ships. The entire Galactic Council's combined emergency response fleet numbered fewer than 8,000 vessels. And most of those were specialized research or military craft with limited passenger capacity. "There's another problem," Communications Officer Jex Nil interrupted. "Humans aren't part of the Galactic Council. They're classified as a developing species under protection protocols. Direct contact requires authorization from the High Council, and that process takes weeks even in emergency situations." Zarth knew the regulations by heart. Every spacefaring species in the galaxy was carefully monitored during their development phase. First contact was a delicate process that required extensive preparation and cultural analysis. Premature contact had led to disasters in the past, civilizations that had collapsed or turned hostile when confronted with the reality of galactic society. But 14 million lives hung in the balance. What if we made it look like an accident? She heard herself saying, surprising everyone on the bridge, including herself. A distress signal that accidentally reached their space. Not official first contact, just a request for help that happened to be overheard. Commander, Tactical Officer Brendar spoke up, his deep voice carrying a warning tone. If the High Council discovers we deliberately circumvented first contact protocols, the consequences could include exile or worse. Your entire crew would share that fate. Zaratech looked around at her officers. These weren't just her subordinates. They were her family, chosen companions who had served together for over 20 cycles. The Veltar didn't form crews lightly, and asking them to risk their futures for a plan that might not even work felt unconscionable. I'm not ordering anyone to participate in this, she said finally. If we do this, it has to be unanimous. And, if we're caught, I'll take full responsibility. The bridge was quiet for a long moment. Then, Jexnil turned from his communication station with a grim smile. Ma'am, if we don't try everything possible to save those people, we'll have to live with that knowledge for the rest of our lives. I'd rather face exile than live with that kind of guilt. One by one, the other officers voiced their agreement. Even Brendar, whose species valued protocol above almost everything else, gave a reluctant nod. Very well, Zaratech said, moving to the communications console. Jexnil, compose a general distress message. Make it clear we need evacuation assistance for 40 million beings, but don't specify our location precisely. Format it as an automated distress beacon, the kind that gets triggered during emergency situations. As Jexnil worked, his 6 arms flying across the controls with practiced efficiency, Nethera continued analyzing the human space readings. Commander, there's something else you should know about humans. Our behavioral analysis suggests they have an unusually strong response to distress calls, even from unknown sources. There are dozens of documented cases where human vessels have diverted from their planned routes to assist ships in trouble. What kind of response times are we talking about? Zaratech asked. Their average response to distress signals in their own space is less than 6 hours, Nethera replied. And in every case we've observed, they've committed significantly more resources than the minimum required to resolve the situation. Brendar looked up from his tactical display with a puzzled expression. That's highly inefficient. Why would they commit excess resources to situations that don't directly benefit them?
Cultural behavioral patterns, Nethera explained.
Humans appear to value individual life preservation above resource efficiency. Their rescue operations often involve multiple ships and crews when a single vessel would be sufficient. Zaratech felt a flicker of hope. If humans truly responded to distress calls with overwhelming force, they might actually have a chance of saving everyone in Nexus Prime. Message is ready for transmission, Commander, Jexnil reported. I've configured it to appear as an automated beacon triggered by the gravitational cascade failure. It will reach the edge of human space in approximately 4 hours. Send it, Zaratech ordered. The next few hours passed slowly. The crew monitored the cascade progression in Nexus Prime while keeping one sensor array focused on the direction of human space. Evacuation efforts continued with the existing fleet, but the numbers remained stubbornly unchanged. They were still going to lose 14 million lives unless something changed dramatically. Commander, Sensor Operator Kelshawn called out suddenly, I'm detecting subspace distortions at the edge of our sensor range. Direction consistent with human space approach vector. Zaratech felt her hearts begin to race. How many ships? The distortion pattern is unusual, Kelshawn reported, his voice filled with confusion. It's either one massive vessel or... He paused, adjusting his instruments. Commander, I'm reading multiple jump signatures. Many multiple signatures. The main display activated, showing the long-range sensor feed. What they saw made the entire bridge crew fall silent with shock. Ships were emerging from hyperspace at the edge of their sensor range. Not 1 or 2 vessels, but dozens. Then hundreds. The sensor display struggled to keep track of the individual contacts as more and more ships appeared, forming up into organized battle groups that stretched across thousands of kilometers of space. How many? Zaratech whispered. Still counting, ma'am, Kelshawn replied, his voice barely steady. Current count is over 1,500 vessels and rising. They're organized into fleet formations unlike anything in our tactical databases.
Fleet formation.
Brendar leaned forward at his station. You mean military vessels? Negative, sir. Energy signatures suggest a mix of military escorts and massive cargo haulers. Some of those ships are registering tonnages larger than our biggest evacuation transports. As they watched, the human fleet continued to grow. 2,000 ships. 3,000. The orderly formation suggested a level of organization and preparation that seemed impossible for a species that had supposedly just received their distress signal 4 hours ago. Commander, Communications Officer Jexnil said quietly, I'm receiving a transmission on standard galactic frequencies. The humans are attempting to communicate. Zartich felt her mouth go dry. This was it. First contact with humanity, initiated by her decision to break the most fundamental law of galactic civilization. Whatever happened next would change both species forever. Put it through, she ordered. The main communication screen flickered to life, revealing the face of a creature unlike anything the Veltar had ever communicated with directly. The human's features were strange yet somehow familiar, with 2 forward-facing eyes that seemed to radiate both intelligence and something that might have been compassion. This is Admiral Sarah Chan of the United Earth Emergency Response Fleet, the human said, her voice carrying across the bridge with startling clarity. We received your distress signal approximately 4 hours ago. We have assembled an evacuation fleet of 4,000 vessels with combined transport capacity for approximately 60 million beings. Please transmit coordinates of the emergency zone and any special requirements for your people. The bridge was absolutely silent. For 1,000 ships, 60 million capacity. They hadn't just responded to the distress call. They had apparently mobilized their entire civilization for a rescue operation to save people they had never met. Did she say 4,000 ships? Jexnil whispered. On the screen, Admiral Chen continued speaking. We understand this may be first contact between our species, but immediate life preservation takes priority over diplomatic protocols. Our medical teams are prepared to treat a wide variety of biological requirements, and our transport ships can be configured for different atmospheric and gravitational needs. We're ready to begin evacuation operations as soon as you can guide us to the emergency zone. Zardich realized that tears were flowing from her eyes, something that happened rarely for her species. In 4 hours, these humans had assembled a rescue fleet large enough to save not just the 14 million people they couldn't reach, but everyone in the Nexus Prime system with capacity to spare. Jexnil, she said quietly, transmit the Nexus Prime coordinates and begin broadcasting evacuation protocols for all species in the system. As her communications officer began the transmission that would bring salvation to 40 million beings, Zartich wondered what kind of civilization humanity really was. The galaxy was about to find out. Admiral Sarachan stood on the bridge of the UES Prometheus, watching the tactical display as her fleet approached the Nexus Prime system. The sheer scale of what lay before them made even her experienced crew pause in wonder. 12 worlds, dozens of orbital stations, and the most complex evacuation operation in human history, all compressed into a time frame that would have been considered impossible just a few years ago. Admiral, her communications officer, Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez, turned from his station with an expression of barely controlled amazement. We're receiving detailed evacuation protocols from multiple alien species. The transmission is being automatically translated by our linguistic AI, but some of the requirements are challenging. Chun moved to Rodriguez's station, scanning the incoming data streams. The information was staggering in its complexity. Different species required different atmospheric compositions, gravity settings, temperature ranges, and even different light spectra. Some breathed oxygen like humans, others required methane or hydrogen sulfide environments. Several species needed constant exposure to specific radiation wavelengths that would be lethal to others. How many different biological requirements are we looking at? She asked. Current count shows representatives from 47 different species across the system, Rodriguez replied. Some of these environmental needs are mutually exclusive. We can't transport certain species on the same ships without risking fatalities. Chen nodded, her mind already working through the logistical challenges. This was why humanity had built such a massive and diverse fleet over the past century. When they had first detected signs of galactic civilization through deep space monitoring, human leadership had made a fundamental decision. If they were going to join the galaxy, they were going to do it right. Signal the fleet, she ordered. Begin deploying atmospheric conversion modules. I want every transport configured for maximum biological diversity within the next 2 hours. Captain James Morrison, her tactical officer, looked up from his station with concern. Admiral, that's going to stretch our resources thin. We're talking about reconfiguring 4,000 ships for specialized transport roles. Then we'd better get started, Chen replied simply. As the human fleet spread out across the Nexus Prime system, the true magnitude of their response became apparent to the alien observers. The ships weren't just large. They were specifically designed for exactly this kind of massive humanitarian operation. Each transport vessel carried modular compartments that could be rapidly reconfigured for different environmental needs. Engineering ships deployed specialized equipment that could create safe atmospheric barriers between incompatible species. On the silent observer, Captain Zarth watched the human fleet operations with growing amazement. Nethera, are you seeing this? Yes, Commander, the science officer replied, her voice filled with wonder. Their ships aren't just repurposed military or cargo vessels. These appear to be purpose-built for large-scale evacuation operations. Look at the deployment patterns. The tactical display showed human ships spreading throughout the system with mathematical precision. Each vessel moved to an optimal position for maximum evacuation efficiency, creating a three-dimensional grid that would minimize travel time for refugee transport. More impressive still, they were doing it while maintaining perfect coordination among 4,000 different ships. How is this level of coordination possible? Brendar asked from his tactical station. Our best fleet operations involve maybe 50 ships, and that requires extensive planning and preparation. I think I'm beginning to understand, Nethera said quietly. Look at the communication patterns between their ships. She highlighted the data streams flowing between human vessels. Instead of the hierarchical communication structure used by most galactic civilizations, where orders flowed from command ships to individual vessels, the humans were using a distributed network where every ship communicated with every other ship in real time. It's like they're operating as a single organism, Zarth observed. For 1,000 ships, but one coordinated mind. Meanwhile, aboard the Prometheus, Admiral Chun was coordinating with alien evacuation coordinators across the system. The main screen showed a dozen different species representatives, each providing critical information about their people's specific needs. Admiral Chun spoke a crystalline being whose species communicated through harmonic frequencies. The Silmethri colonies require constant exposure to gamma radiation for cellular stability. Without it, our people will begin dying within 12 hours. Understood, Chun replied calmly. We have specialized medical transports equipped with controlled radiation sources. Your people will be housed in ships specifically configured for your biological needs. Another alien, a floating gas cloud entity that communicated through electromagnetic pulses, expressed concern about atmospheric requirements. Human Admiral, our species exists in a methane-hydrogen atmosphere at temperatures that would freeze most organic matter. We fear your vessels cannot accommodate our needs. Chun turned to her engineering officer. Commander Park, status on cryogenic transport configuration? We have 200 ships currently being fitted with deep-cold atmospheric systems, Park replied promptly. Estimated completion time is 90 minutes. We can transport up to 3 million beings in methane-hydrogen environments at -200 degrees Celsius. The alien representatives fell silent. Not only did the humans understand their exotic requirements, but they were actively reconfiguring their fleet to meet them. How did you know to prepare for such diverse biological needs? Asked the Veltar communication officer who had been serving as a liaison. This level of preparation suggests advanced knowledge of our species' requirements. Chun paused, realizing she was about to reveal something that might surprise their new alien friends. We've been monitoring galactic civilization for approximately 150 of your cycles, she admitted. Not for any hostile purpose, but because we knew that eventually we would make contact, and we wanted to be ready to help when that time came. You've been watching us for 150 cycles? The crystalline being's harmonic frequency shifted to what seemed like amazement. But our intelligence suggested your species had barely achieved interstellar capability. We learned early in our development that the best way to avoid conflict was to understand other civilizations before making contact, Chin explained. We've been preparing for this day for generations. What she didn't mention was the full scope of that preparation. Human deep space monitoring had identified over 200 different galactic species, mapped their territories, studied their technologies, and analyzed their biological requirements. More importantly, they had observed the frequency of large-scale disasters in galactic space and made a critical decision. Humanity's role in the galaxy would be as protectors and rescuers. Admiral, Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez called out urgently, "We're receiving priority communications from evacuation coordinators across the system. The cascade failure is accelerating faster than predicted. We now have less than 4 days to complete the evacuation." The news sent a wave of panic through the alien communication channels, but Chun remained calm. "Signal all fleet commanders," she ordered. "We're moving to accelerated evacuation protocols. Begin immediate pickup operations for all populated areas." Across the Nexus Prime system, the human fleet shifted into high gear. Transport ships that had been carefully positioning themselves suddenly accelerated toward populated worlds and orbital stations. The evacuation became a carefully choreographed dance of vessels moving between planets, stations, and transport hubs with clockwork precision. Captain Zarth watched a human transport approach one of the Kethmoran colony worlds. The ship was massive, easily 5 times larger than the biggest evacuation vessel in the Galactic Council fleet. As it entered orbit, smaller shuttlecraft deployed like seeds from a flower, spreading across the planet's surface to begin collecting refugees. "How many people can one of those ships carry?" she asked. Based on the displacement readings, Neth Era calculated, approximately 50,000 beings, assuming standard life support requirements. But the humans weren't stopping at standard requirements. As they watched, specialized atmospheric modules were being attached to the transport ships, creating isolated environments for species with exotic needs. Gas cloud beings, crystalline entities that required specific mineral solutions, and even energy-based life forms that existed as coherent electromagnetic patterns were all being accommodated. "Commander," Sensor Operator Kelshawn reported, "I'm detecting some kind of unusual activity around the Cascade Zone itself." Zarth turned to look at the long-range sensors. At the center of the Nexus Prime system, where the dying star was creating gravitational distortions that would eventually tear the system apart, a group of human ships had taken up position. "What are they doing there?" she wondered aloud. "The energy readings are consistent with some kind of stabilization field," Kelshawn replied. "It appears they're trying to slow down the cascade failure." The implications hit Zarth like a physical blow. The humans weren't just evacuating people from a disaster. They were trying to prevent the disaster entirely. If they could slow the cascade effect even by a few days, it would give them time to save everyone, not just most of the population. On the Prometheus, Admiral Chun was coordinating with her science teams on exactly that possibility. "Dr. Martinez, what's the status on cascade stabilization?" "The gravitational generators are online and holding steady," replied the chief science officer. "We can't stop the cascade, but we can slow it down significantly. Current projections show we can extend the timeline by approximately 60 hours. Will that be enough?" Martinez looked at the evacuation progress reports flowing across his screen. "If we maintain current evacuation rates, yes. But, Admiral, maintaining the stabilization field is going to require keeping ships in extremely dangerous positions. If the field fails, we'll lose everyone in that area." Chun nodded grimly. "How many ships do you need for the stabilization operation?" "Minimum of 200 vessels, working in rotating shifts to maintain the field generators." "Do it," Chun ordered without hesitation. "Signal the fleet. All available science vessels are to support the stabilization operation." Across human space, word of the Nexus Prime evacuation was spreading through military channels, civilian networks, and emergency response organizations. What had started as a single fleet response was rapidly becoming a civilization-wide mobilization. "Admiral," Rodriguez reported, "we're receiving word from Earth Command. Additional fleets are en route to our position. Current estimate is another 6,000 ships arriving within the next 18 hours. Chun felt a surge of pride in her species. 10,000 ships, the largest fleet humanity had ever assembled, all for the purpose of saving people they had never met, from species they had never officially contacted. "Ma'am," Captain Morrison added, "we're also receiving volunteer support from civilian vessels, passenger liners, cargo haulers, even private yachts are requesting permission to join the evacuation effort." "How many civilian vessels?" Morrison checked his display. "Current count is approaching 15,000 ships, and rising." The scope of humanity's response was beginning to exceed even Admiral Chen's expectations. Not just the military and emergency response organizations, but ordinary citizens were dropping everything to help with the rescue operation. On the alien communication channels, word was spreading about the human response. Species that had never heard of humanity were learning that an unknown civilization had mobilized over 20,000 ships to save people they had never met, based on a single distress call. Captain Zaratach listened to the communications chatter with growing amazement. Jex Nil, are you monitoring the galactic communication networks? Yes, Commander. The word about the human response is spreading throughout civilized space. I'm receiving inquiries from the High Council, the Zephyrian Trade Federation, and even the Altarian Military Command. What kind of inquiries? They want to know who these humans are and how they assembled such a massive fleet so quickly, Jexnil replied. Some of the messages sound almost frightened. Zaratach could understand why. A civilization capable of mobilizing 20,000 ships in response to a single distress call was a civilization with resources and organizational capabilities that exceeded most established galactic powers. The fact that they were using those capabilities for rescue operations rather than conquest was reassuring, but also raised questions about what humanity might be capable of if they were ever threatened or attacked. As the evacuation continued and the human fleet grew ever larger, one thing was becoming clear to everyone watching. First contact with humanity was going to change the galaxy in ways no one had anticipated. 3 days into the evacuation, High Council Representative Mordain arrived in the Nexus Prime system aboard the flagship Eternal Wisdom, accompanied by a formal diplomatic escort that represented the most powerful civilizations in the galaxy. What he found there challenged everything the galactic community thought they knew about scale, organization, and the very nature of interstellar civilization. The human fleet had grown to over 30,000 vessels. This is impossible, whispered Senior Counselor Valena, a Zephyrian whose species had been building fleets for over 10,000 cycles. No civilization can mobilize this many ships in 3 days. It takes our entire industrial sector 6 months to build 30,000 vessels. Representative Mordain, whose species had served as galactic peacekeepers for millennia, watched the tactical display with the expression of someone witnessing something that violated the fundamental laws of physics. The human ships weren't just numerous. They were operating with a level of coordination that suggested a completely different approach to fleet management. Contact the human command vessel, he ordered. I need to speak with whoever is commanding this operation. Within minutes, Admiral Chen's image appeared on the main communication screen. Behind her, Mordain could see a command bridge that was buzzing with activity. Dozens of human officers coordinating the evacuation with calm efficiency that spoke of extensive training and preparation. Representative Mordain, Chun said, somehow already knowing his identity despite this being their first direct communication. I assume you're here about the first contact protocols we've technically violated. Mordain felt his throat sacs constrict with surprise. You know who I am? We've been monitoring galactic politics for some time, Chun replied matter-of-factly. We understand this situation creates diplomatic complications, but saving lives took priority over protocol. We're prepared to face any consequences once the evacuation is complete. Admiral Chun, Mordain said carefully, I need to understand something. Our intelligence suggests your species achieved interstellar capability only recently. How do you possess a fleet of this magnitude? Chun paused, seeming to consider how much to reveal. Representative, humanity has been preparing for galactic contact for over a century. We observed your civilizations, studied your technologies, and made a decision about what kind of role we wanted to play in the galaxy when we finally revealed ourselves. What kind of role? Senior Counselor Valana interjected. Protectors, Chun said simply. We saw the disasters that regularly strike galactic civilization. Solar cascade failures, plague outbreaks, natural disasters, war, refugee situations. We decided that when we joined the galactic community, we wanted to be the civilization that other species could call when everything went wrong. The implications of that statement sent ripples through the High Council delegation. The humans hadn't accidentally stumbled into this rescue operation. They had spent a century preparing for exactly this kind of situation. How many ships could you theoretically deploy? Mordain asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. Chen's expression became unreadable. For a humanitarian crisis of sufficient scale? Our full mobilization protocols allow for deployment of approximately 200,000 vessels within a standard week. The bridge of the eternal wisdom fell completely silent. 200,000 ships. That was larger than the combined military forces of the entire Galactic Council. Admiral, Valana spoke up, her voice carefully controlled. Such a fleet would represent the most powerful military force in known galactic history. Representative, I think there's been a misunderstanding, Chun replied. These aren't military vessels in the way you're thinking. They're purpose-built for humanitarian operations. Search and rescue, disaster relief, medical support, refugee transport. Our actual military fleet is a separate organization entirely. Mordain felt his legs grow weak. If this humanitarian fleet numbered in the hundreds of thousands, what did humanity's actual military look like? Meanwhile, throughout the Nexus Prime system, the scale of human organization was becoming apparent to the alien species being evacuated. Refugee processing centers had been established on a dozen different worlds, each one capable of handling multiple species with completely different biological requirements. Captain Zarth toured one of these facilities aboard a human medical ship called the Hippocrates. What she found there challenged her understanding of logistics and medical science. Dr. Sarah Kim introduced the human medical officer guiding her tour, our xenobiology specialist. She's been treating patients from over 40 different species simultaneously. Dr. Kim looked up from a patient whose crystalline structure was unlike anything in Zarth's experience. Captain, we're finding that most galactic species have surprisingly similar basic medical needs, despite the obvious physical differences. Pain management, injury treatment, psychological trauma support. The fundamentals translate across most biological systems. How do you have the knowledge to treat so many different species? Zarth asked. We've been studying galactic biology for decades, Dr. Kim explained as they moved through the medical bay. When we realized we would eventually make contact, we wanted to be ready to provide medical assistance if needed. They passed treatment areas configured for gas-based life forms, radiation-dependent crystalline beings, and even energy patterns that existed as coherent electromagnetic fields. Each area had human medical staff working alongside automated systems that had been specifically designed for alien physiology. This level of preparation, Zarth said quietly, it suggests you've been planning for this contact for much longer than most species do.
Doktor Kim nodded.
Humanity learned early that the best way to make friends is to be useful when they need help. We studied your civilizations not to exploit weaknesses, but to understand how we could help when the time came. Back in space, the evacuation was proceeding with mechanical efficiency. Human transport ships moved between worlds in carefully coordinated patterns, loading refugees and transporting them to processing centers where they could be relocated to safe worlds outside the Cascade Zone. But it was the Cascade stabilization operation that truly demonstrated human technological capabilities. 200 human science vessels had formed a three-dimensional array around the dying star, projecting gravitational fields that slowed the cascade effect. The energy requirements for such an operation should have been beyond any single species' capability. How are they generating that much power? Demanded Chief Science Officer Talmor aboard the High Council observation vessel. His sensor readings showed power output levels that exceeded anything in galactic records. The human ships were somehow generating and coordinating energy fields that affected the fundamental structure of spacetime itself. I'm detecting unusual subspace resonance patterns, reported his assistant. It appears they're using some form of distributed power generation where all 200 ships contribute to a single field effect. That's theoretically possible, Talmor admitted. But the coordination requirements would be impossible for any known computer system to manage. Unless, his assistant said quietly, they're not using computer systems in the way we understand them. Meanwhile, Admiral Chun was dealing with an unexpected problem. The scope of humanity's response was beginning to cause political complications throughout the galaxy. Messages were pouring in from dozens of different civilizations, some offering assistance, others demanding explanations about human capabilities and intentions. Admiral, Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez reported, we're receiving a priority communication from something called the Altarian Defense Coalition. They're demanding to know our military capabilities and territorial claims. Chun sighed. This was the inevitable consequence of revealing human civilization's true scope. Every major power in the galaxy was suddenly reevaluating humanity as a potential threat rather than just another developing species. Put them through, she ordered. The communication screen activated to reveal a group of militant-looking beings whose cybernetic enhancements suggested a highly militarized society. Human Admiral, spoke their leader, I am War Commander Thexalone of the Altarian Defense Coalition. Your fleet's capabilities represent a potential threat to galactic security. We demand immediate disclosure of your military strength and territorial ambitions. Chun looked at the War Commander with an expression of polite confusion. War Commander, we don't have territorial ambitions. We're here to evacuate refugees from a natural disaster. No civilization mobilizes 30,000 ships for purely humanitarian purposes, Thexalone replied aggressively. What are your true intentions? To save lives, Chun said simply. That's our only intention here. You expect us to believe that a civilization capable of deploying hundreds of thousands of ships has no military ambitions? Chun paused, realizing that the conversation was being monitored by dozens of other galactic powers who were probably asking themselves the same questions. War Commander, she said finally, humanity has observed galactic civilization for over a century. We've seen the wars, the territorial disputes, the resource conflicts that plague this region of space. We made a conscious decision to take a different path. What kind of path? Demanded another voice from the Altarian delegation. We decided to become the civilization that others could count on when everything went wrong, Chin explained. Instead of building fleets to conquer territory, we built fleets to save lives. Instead of developing weapons to destroy our enemies, we developed tools to heal the wounded and shelter the homeless. The communication channel fell silent for several moments before Thexalone spoke again. You're claiming to be a purely defensive civilization? Not defensive, Chun corrected. Humanitarian. There's a difference. What she didn't explain was the full scope of humanity's philosophical transformation over the past century. When they had first detected galactic civilization, human leadership had faced a choice. Join the galaxy as another predatory species competing for resources and territory, or find a different way to earn their place among the stars. They had chosen to become indispensable. Every ship in the human fleet was designed for dual purposes. The massive transport vessels could be rapidly converted to hospital ships, refugee centers, or disaster relief command posts. The science vessels could provide environmental restoration, terraforming assistance, or medical research support. Even the military escort ships were equipped primarily with defensive systems and rescue equipment. Admiral, War Commander Thexalone said slowly, if your civilization truly possesses the capability to deploy hundreds of thousands of humanitarian vessels, what prevents you from conquering the galaxy? Chun smiled slightly. The same thing that prevents you from helping 40 million refugees, War Commander. Choice. The communication ended, leaving the Altai.